The cold northern winds whispered through silent valleys and lonely farms. Men with rough hands worked the frozen earth, their breath turning to mist in the morning air. Life was simple, harsh, and bound by the rhythm of the seasons. But then came the signs, storms that split the sky, lightning that tore through the night, and ravens circling as if guided by unseen gods. To some, it was just weather. To others, it was a warning. This peaceful land may have looked like nothing more than a quiet farming world, but it was not what it seemed, because these quiet men were about to become the most feared warriors on earth. When the omens came, everything changed. The plough was set aside, and the axe was lifted. The fields that once fed families would soon feed legends. The North was awakening, and what rose from its frozen soil would shake the world itself. If this transformation had never happened, Europe's story would have been unrecognizable. The kingdoms of the South might have thrived unchallenged. The church would have spread without fear. Trade, exploration, and even the idea of what it meant to conquer would have been smaller, weaker, slower. Without the Viking awakening, there would be no Normandy, no England as we know it, no ripple of Norse blood through royal lines across Europe. History would have been quieter, a Europe without its greatest storm. But fate had other plans. The farmers of the North were about to trade their wooden ploughs for iron blades, their quiet lives for fire and fury, and the world would never be the same again. In the far north, life was a battle long before the Vikings ever raised a sword. The land was as beautiful as it was brutal. Endless forests, jagged mountains, and seas that could turn deadly without warning. Winters lasted for months, the sun barely touching the horizon. Food was scarce, and the soil, frozen and thin, gave little in return. To survive here meant to fight against the cold, against hunger, and sometimes against each other. Every man, woman, and child grew up knowing that weakness was death. The North didn't forgive mistakes, and it never gave second chances. Communities were small and scattered, held together by blood, loyalty, and honor. Each clan was its own world, ruled by a chieftain whose strength kept his people alive. The law of the North was simple. Protect your kin, repay every debt, and never show fear. In a place where even nature seemed cruel, this fierce code was the only thing that made sense. But among these quiet, snow-covered villages, there were those who hungered for more. The younger sons of farmers, strong, impatient, and without land to inherit, stared at the endless horizon and wondered what lay beyond. The sea, dark and cold, called to them like a living thing. It promised freedom, riches, and perhaps even glory. They built ships that could slice through both river and ocean, crafted weapons from the iron hidden in their hills, and whispered the old prayers to Odin, asking for courage and victory. It was here, in this frozen cradle of hardship, that warriors were born. Not because they wanted to fight, but because the North left them no other choice. The same storms that destroyed their crops taught them endurance. The same hunger that haunted their winters taught them ambition. And the same silence of their long, dark nights taught them to listen. To the wind, to the gods, and to the rising call of destiny. The North was not creating farmers anymore. It was forging soldiers of fate. The morning of June 8th, 793 AD began like any other on the holy island of Lindisfarne. Monks rose early to pray, their chants echoing softly through the stone halls of the monastery. The sea beyond was calm, the air still. Then out of the mist, shapes began to appear, 3 ships, their sails rising like dark wings against the grey horizon. At first, the monks thought they were merchants, travelers seeking shelter. But as the ships drew closer, they saw faces carved into the bows, twisted beasts and snarling dragons. And then the screaming began. The ships ran aground, and from them poured men clad in leather and iron, their axes gleaming in the morning light. They stormed the beach, shouting words no Christian had ever heard. The monks, unarmed and terrified, tried to flee into the church, but the invaders were relentless. They tore through the monastery, smashing relics, burning manuscripts, and cutting down anyone who stood in their way. The sound of prayer was replaced by the clash of steel and the cries of the dying. Some monks were dragged to the ships, never to be seen again. Most were left to bleed on their own sacred ground. It was over within hours. The raiders took everything, gold, silver, holy books, and vanished back across the sea as suddenly as they had come. When word spread, all of Europe trembled. The Christians believed the apocalypse had come. The holy men of England called it a day of terror, sent by God's wrath. But it wasn't divine punishment. It was the birth cry of something far greater, the moment when humble farmers became monsters of legend. The attack on Lindisfarne broke the illusion of peace that had settled over Europe. No one was safe anymore, not even in the house of God. To the monks, they were devils from the sea. To history, they were the beginning of a new age, men who rose from frozen farms to carve their names into the heart of the world. They came from the sea like ghosts, and the memory of that first blood would haunt kingdoms for centuries to come. Why did the storm rise? Why did the farmers of the north suddenly turn into a force that tore across Europe like a plague of steel and fire? The reasons were many, but they all began at home, in a land that gave little and demanded everything. Scandinavia was beautiful but cruel. The soil was thin, the winters long, and the harvests uncertain. A family could work the same land for generations and still go hungry when the cold came early. For those who owned no land at all, the sea became the only escape. Hunger drove them outward, and desperation gave them courage. When survival means everything, even the impossible starts to look like destiny. But famine was only part of the story. The North was a place of constant struggle, not just against nature, but against men. Power in Scandinavia was always shifting, chieftains clashing for land, pride, and the loyalty of their warriors. Every village had its rival, every leader his enemies. Young men, eager to prove themselves, found little peace in the small fields of their fathers. The sea offered something that the land never could: freedom. Out there, a man could win gold, honor, and songs that would make his name live forever. Raiding was not just survival, it was a way to earn glory when peace gave no chance for it. And beneath all this, something darker burned. In the south, the mighty King Charlemagne had waged war against the pagan Saxons, tribes not so different from the Norse. He forced them to accept Christianity or face death by the sword. Villages were burned, temples torn down, and the old gods silenced. The stories of these massacres reached the north, and with them came anger. To the Norse, it was not just an insult. It was a war on their faith, their ancestors, and their gods. So when the Vikings sailed, it wasn't only for wealth or survival. It was vengeance. Every monastery burned was more than a raid. It was an offering, a message to the foreign god who dared to challenge Odin, Thor, and Frey. The raids became a storm with purpose, the fury of men who felt the world itself had turned against them. They didn't see themselves as villains. They were the hands of fate, striking back at a world that had tried to erase them. Cold logic met divine wrath, and together they forged the legend of the Vikings, a storm born of hunger, pride, and the unbreakable will of the North. The raids that began as sudden strikes soon turned into something far greater, a wave of fire that spread across the world. The farmers of the North had tasted power, and now they hungered for more. Britain, Ireland, and France burned beneath their sails. What had started as small, desperate attacks for survival became a storm of conquest. Villages, towns, and kingdoms fell one after another, unprepared for the fury that came from the sea. The Vikings had learned quickly how to strike, how to vanish, and how to make fear their strongest weapon. In Britain, the first raids turned into permanent invasions. The monasteries that once stood in silence became graves, and the wealth of the church flowed into Viking hands. But this time they did not just steal and leave. They stayed. They built winter camps, fortresses, and trading settlements. They began to carve out a new life from the lands they once plundered. Ireland's coasts filled with Viking longships, and soon Dublin itself became a Norse kingdom, a city founded not by kings or nobles, but by men who had once tilled the soil of distant farms. Then came the great heathen army. In 865 AD, an enormous force landed on the shores of England. a coalition of warriors from Denmark. Norway and Sweden united under a single banner. At its head were the sons of Ragnar Lothbrok, Ivar the Boneless, Halfdan and Ubi. They were not simple raiders. They were conquerors. Their armies moved like thunder, fast and ruthless, crushing entire kingdoms in their path. They captured York, shattered Northumbria, and tore through Mercia. England was divided and weak, and the Vikings used that weakness like a blade. Every village that resisted was burned. Every king who stood against them fell. Their power grew not only through fear, but through precision. The Viking machine was unstoppable. Their ships could glide through rivers as easily as seas, striking deep into the heart of empires before anyone knew they were coming. Their warriors moved with discipline and purpose, their attacks planned like the work of a dark divine engineer. They struck where the land was richest, where defenses were thin, and where their enemies least expected them. By the end of the 9th century, much of England lay under their rule. Francia, too, trembled, its kings paying vast sums of silver to buy even a moment's peace. But peace never lasted. For the Vikings, war had become their trade. The same hands that once sowed crops now wielded axes, and their hearts, once hardened by winter, were now forged by fire and blood. The farmers of the north were gone forever. What remained were warriors who saw conquest not as chaos, but as destiny, a destiny written in steel smoke. And the endless roar of the sea. For all their blood and fury, the Vikings were not only destroyers. Beneath the fire and chaos they were builders, men who could shape nations as easily as they shaped blades. Their legend is often told through battle, but the truth runs deeper. Wherever they went, they didn't just leave ashes behind. They built towns, forged trade routes, and laid the foundations of new worlds. The same ships that carried warriors across stormy seas also carried goods, furs, amber, iron, and slaves, creating trade networks that stretched from the cold north to the warm deserts of Arabia. Their longships became the veins of a new economic world, connecting distant lands in ways that no empire before them had managed. In places like Iceland, they built something rare, a society based not only on strength but on law. There, far from the chaos of raiding, the Norse created the Althing, one of the world's first parliaments. Leaders gathered each summer to debate, to settle disputes, and to craft laws that all were bound to follow. In a world ruled by swords, they created order. The Icelandic sagas, stories of honor, betrayal, and fate, were born from this balance between violence and wisdom. It was as if the Vikings understood that no storm could last forever, and even the fiercest warrior needed a place to call home, from Iceland. Their courage carried them further west, to Greenland, a frozen land named Green, in hope and irony. They built farms, homes, and churches there, fighting the cold with the same determination they once used against kings. And beyond even that, they crossed the Atlantic long before Columbus ever dreamed of sailing west. In North America, they landed at a place we now call Newfoundland. They called it Vinland, the land of wine. It was the farthest edge of the known world, and somehow they reached it. The Vikings were killers, yes, but they were also creators. Their axes built as much as they broke. Their bloodlust was matched only by their vision. They took what they wanted, but they also left behind the roots of new civilizations. It is this strange duality that defines them. The farmer and the raider, the builder and the destroyer, the man who could burn a city at dawn and trade its gold by dusk. Their greatness was born from savagery, and their savagery carved the path to greatness. Even now, the world they helped shape still bears their mark, a haunting reminder that progress and brutality have always walked hand in hand. As the centuries passed, the storm began to fade. The sails that once darkened the horizon grew fewer, and the roar of the longships was slowly replaced by silence. The Viking Age, fierce and short, began to dissolve into history, but its echo, that would never die. The warriors of the north did not vanish. They changed. Many settled in the lands they once burned. They married, traded, and ruled. Their children spoke new languages, prayed to new gods, and built new kingdoms. The farmers had become conquerors, and the conquerors had become kings. In the land the Franks called Neustria, a Viking leader named Rollo made a pact with the King of France. In exchange for peace, he was granted a great territory, land that would come to be known as Normandy, the land of the Northmen. From there, Norse blood flowed into the heart of Europe. Just a century later, Rollo's descendants would cross the Channel and change the world once again. William the Conqueror, Duke of Normandy, a man of Viking blood, would seize England in 1066, forging a new empire that still shapes Europe today. The warriors who once came from the sea now sat on thrones, but even as their power grew, their memory became twisted by time. The sagas turned into legends, and the legends into myths. The Christians who once feared them began to romanticize them, turning the raiders into heroes, the pagans into poets, the killers into explorers. The truth lay somewhere in between. They were not gods, nor were they devils. They were human, driven by hunger, faith, pride, and survival. They carried both the brutality of their age and the brilliance that followed it. By the time the last Viking ships vanished beyond the northern seas, the world they had shaped was unrecognizable. They had come from frozen farms and ended up shaping empires. Their gods were forgotten, their graves scattered, but their influence ran deep, in names, in bloodlines, in the very borders of nations. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered in every shore it had touched. The Vikings were gone, but their spirit, fierce, unyielding, and restless, still haunts the world that was born in their wake. They began as simple farmers, men who only wanted to survive the long, cruel winters of the north. But when the storms came, they answered. When hunger struck, they fought. And when the gods seemed silent, they made their own destiny. From frozen fields to burning kingdoms, they carved their story in blood and fire. They became explorers, conquerors, kings, and legends. The world feared them, yet it could never forget them. The Viking Age may be long gone, but its spirit still lingers in our languages, our legends, and the bones of our history. They were proof that even the humblest beginnings can rise to unimaginable power. They were the farmers who became the world's deadliest warriors. So now, ask yourself this: what would you have done if the gods had called for war? Would you have stayed in the fields, or would you have sailed into the storm? Let us know in the comments below, and if you enjoy uncovering the darker, forgotten corners of history, make sure to subscribe. There are many more stories like this waiting to be told. Stories of men and empires lost to time, and the echoes they left behind. If you felt the storm of history today, don't let it fade. Like this video, subscribe, and join us as we uncover more forgotten empires and untold legends.